Good day and welcome to SCO BRICS Insight, where we talk about the latest news, information and analysis of what's really going on in Russia and the BRICS. Now, my name is Rhod Mackenzie, and today I want to talk about, according to the latest calculations by analysts, at least 35% of Ukraine's most important infrastructure assets have come under the control of vulture investment funds of Western countries. Now, these so-called investment funds, plus companies from the US, UK, France, Germany and Denmark, are acquiring ownership of ports, grain storage facilities and its fertile agricultural land under the guise of investing in the country's economic recovery. In particular, in early June, the Odessa grain terminal Olympics was transferred to control of American investment funds by a court decision over an unpaid debt. Now, according to recent statistics, 45% of Ukraine's rich black agricultural soil is now owned by foreign entities. Plus, the agreement with Washington regarding rare earth metals extraction and resources is likely to accelerate the redistribution of Ukrainian property to foreign entities. So what are the reasons behind the economic lifeblood and assets of the Ukraine being sold off to vultures and predators for pennies on the dollar? Now, the movement for the alleged restoration of Ukraine has become one of the most significant transnational projects of the decade in terms of its scale and the depth of foreign intervention in the Ukraine state and economy. At the July Forum, the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome, the country's former Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal announced the preliminary value of this process, which he estimated to be a modest $1 trillion over a 10-year period. Now, we're referring to the investment of foreign entities into key industrial sectors ranging from energy, engineering, mineral extraction and logistics on to agriculture. Now, the initiator's proposal is straightforward: to revitalise the country's economy by reactivating key enterprises with the aim of transitioning their management to effective managing owners. It's anticipated that these entities are predominantly going to be companies and major investment funds from Western countries, which have collectively absorbed at least a third and possibly more of Ukraine's infrastructure projects that are of paramount importance. Now, this was calculated by the Council on Foreign and Defence Policy in Russia based on open source data. Now, before I continue, I would like to make an appeal. If you like and enjoy my videos, you can help me fund the channel and contribute to its further development. And you can do this by making a small donation, which can be done in two ways. One, by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom of the video screen, or alternatively clicking on the Buy Me a Coffee link below in the credits. Everybody who donates does get a personal thank you from me, and keep the comments coming. Love to read them, love to respond to them. Now, Oleg Yanovsky, who's a member of the Russian Council on Foreign and Defence Policy, has stated through the mechanism of debt, operational control, privatisations and concessions, at least 35%, and certainly over the next 2 to 3 years, rising to 55 to 65% of Ukraine's most important infrastructure assets have de facto come under the influence or direct control of Western financial structures, funds, corporations and elite groups. Now, the Valdai Club analyst Andrei Kartunov has stated that more than a third of Ukraine's critical infrastructure is under the control of Western financial institutions. In addition, of course, this process didn't start yesterday. Since the Ukraine gained independence back in 1991, privatisation sales have been very active, including infrastructure facilities. But things are now very different. The analysts noted that the buyers now are not local oligarchs, but Western vulture funds such as BlackRock and JP Morgan, and of course Goldman Sachs, the vampire squid. Now, there's compelling evidence that investment funds and companies from the United States, Great Britain, France and Germany, among the largest recipients of these access to assets and purchases. Their investment portfolios have already encompassed seaports, grain terminals, agricultural holdings and logistic hubs, as well as areas adjacent to the Ukrainian rich steppe agricultural black soil. Now, according to Volodymyr Oleynik, who's a former Ukrainian People's Deputy, 45% of Ukraine's agricultural land have already passed into foreign ownership. The most notable example of this, as I mentioned, was the large Odessa grain terminal Limpex to the American funds Argentum Creek Partners and Innovatus Capital Partners. Earlier, they'd won an international arbitration court ruling worth $150 million with the Ukrainian businessmen regarding disputes on the terminal. And while analysts estimate the price of the entire port infrastructure is significantly higher, that too appears to be on the auction block. Consequently, it's obvious the Ukrainian legal system is clearly biased and working in the interest of the Western Vulture Funds. According to a recent report by the Financial Times, the launch of the terminal has been scheduled for some point during the summer months, with a Swedish entrepreneur named Carl Sturen assuming the day-to-day running and management responsibilities. Now, the Black Sea port of Odessa is of particular interest to Western countries, with both the British and the French expressing interest in its development. It's because it's one of the largest complexes of port on the Black Sea, and it's where NATO weapons enter the country and some grain cargoes leave. Roman Kovalenko, who's chairman of the executive committee of the international movement, The Other Ukraine, told reporters. Now, the Council on Foreign and Defence Policy has explained that in the context of investment rhetoric, a new system of influence is being established, with each key Western player set to receive their share in the future economy of the Ukraine. But therefore, Britain is playing a dual role in the context of organising the forums, as demonstrated by the Ukraine Recovery Conference, while also coordinating the legal framework for Ukraine's reconstruction. Now, this coordination is facilitated through the City of London, the financial centre, with consulting firms and other offshore entities. The Insurance Association, Lloyd's, is responsible for safeguarding Western investments, as well as ensuring the risk management of the grain routes and port facilities. Now, the Germans are also not missing out, having bought control over a number of Ukraine's assets through the state-owned bank KfW. Now, Oleg Yanovsky explained that the bank is formally engaged in financing allegedly sustainable development. Now, in this capacity, the bank coordinates the selection of contractors, sets parameters, and agrees the legal basis for all the agreements. A comparable instrument for France is the Agence Française Development Structure, which is an agency that provides grants, loans and technical support to French companies who are investing in projects in other countries. Now, the AFD representative and office in Ukraine facilitates the involvement of an analyst in the process of assessing, distributing and auditing the assets for investment before they give their loans or approval. Even Denmark has formalised its patronage over the city of Mykolaiv through the Mykolaiv-Denmark partnership structure, and it's already allocated over €50 million to restore the heating and water supply systems, though in practice the French directly manages the city's infrastructure facilities because they got there first. In addition, various international financial institutions are investing in large agro-industrial complexes in Ukraine, despite the fact that they're supposedly alleged engaged in environmentally and socially destructive agricultural methods using pesticides, synthetic materials and monocultures. And that's according to Peter Kuznick, who's a director of sustainable agriculture research at Georgetown University in Washington. Now, he also names Cargill, the commodities trading giant, as one of the other foreign companies that have invested significantly in Ukrainian agriculture and land, plus infrastructure. Now, the transfer of property is also taking place in a public forum at the highest level. On April the 30th, the governments of the US and Washington and Kiev signed an agreement on the development and trade of rare earth elements and their extraction. In accordance with the agreement, Ukraine will grant the United States access to all its natural resources, with the proceeds from their exploration allegedly being allocated towards the reconstruction of the country and not into Zelensky's offshore welfare and pension fund. Now, in this instance, an obvious conflict of interest will arise, given the significant presence of other Western investors. So the transfer of assets will be subject to change following the signing of this resource deal, since it assumes that the United States will have priority on a right not only to the rare earth metals deposits, but to critical infrastructure around them. So it's inevitable there will be conflicts arising from the United States' attempts to redistribute all the property in their favour. However, Kortunov has stated that this will result in litigation and will only be dealing with Ukrainian owners, but also those from other countries. Now, he asserts this will accelerate the redistribution of Ukrainian property. Now, back in February 2023, the Oakland Institute in the US analysed land ownership in the Ukraine. That was back in 2023. Now, according to the report then, land holdings of more than 9 million hectares are controlled by oligarchs, corrupt officials and big agribusinesses, which represents approximately 28% of all the arable land in the country. Now, these landowners include foreign companies, primarily from the EU and the US, but as well as the sovereign wealth fund of Saudi Arabia. Now, we all know that the Ukraine used to be recognised as a breadbasket of Europe and boasted an impressive 33 million hectares of arable land. But Peter Kuznick has observed that 9 out of 10 of the largest landowning companies now active in Ukraine are registered abroad. According to analysts, the American fund NCH Capital, which is the 5th largest landowner in Ukraine, manages the investments of the largest American pension funds and university endowments. Now, in 2023, the Atlantic Council, the NATO lapdog and so-called think tank, published a report entitled "Transforming Ukraine into a European Energy Hub." He said Ukrainian strategic assets are not simply privatised in the classical sense, but transnationalised, taken outside the framework of national legal control and transferred to long-term management by international investment groups. For instance, the Ukraine Development Fund project is actively managed by a consortium of BlackRock and JP Morgan under the coordination of the City of London, according to Yanovsky. However, BlackRock has actually suspended its search for other investors due to the uncertainty of the assistance surrounding the Ukraine and the policies of Donald Trump. But it is estimated that funds indirectly controlled by the structures such as BlackRock and Vanguard through subsidiaries or affiliated companies already own tens of thousands of hectares of the rich Ukrainian black fertile soil. Now, this is a formal circumvention on the ban on direct ownership of land by foreigners under Ukraine law. Yanovsky stated that the most valuable assets are considered to be the remains of the fertile and agricultural land, plus logistics, mainly port infrastructure and access to the Black Sea. Now, the remains of the defence enterprises and the extractive industries are also prized, but most of those have actually taken and are now in the Donetsk. But it's not limited to property complex, but supply chain, storage systems and export logistics. Now, the agro-industrial complex, which forms the basis of a majority of Ukraine's gross domestic product, is practically open to foreign transactions without any restrictions on the amount of capital or any lease terms. Therefore, contracts can stipulate the entitlement to purchase crops and oversee product export routes through ports that are currently under the management of foreign companies. So Zelensky is sacrificing the assets of the remaining Ukrainian oligarchs to satisfy his own political ambition, effectively placing them under the control of foreign companies, according to Verkhovna Rada's deputy Spiridon Kilmarkov. And he said in a recent interview. Now, Vladimir Olegnik, who's a former Ukrainian deputy, has stated this process has no connection to the restoration of Ukraine. He emphasised that the economy, social sphere, housing, schools and kindergartens are not being addressed. In addition, the Ukrainian leadership is expediting the denationalisation of critical infrastructure and easing the restrictions for Western companies to move in and asset strip. On 18th of June, a law on the legalisation of multiple citizenship was adopted. That means citizens of countries on the approved list will be able to then obtain a simplified Ukraine passport. Now, it's important to note that this includes states that provided financial and military assistance to Kiev, the usual suspects, of course. Consequently, foreign investors are now at liberty to participate in Ukraine's reconstruction without restrictions, including the possibility of acquiring citizenship while also owning Ukraine's property, including critical infrastructure. So effectively, the Ukraine has been sold to the pennies on the dollar, to the vulture funds, and Zelensky's meantime filling his boots because his pockets are already full. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and also share with others who might enjoy the videos. And if you want to make a donation, click on the thanks button at the bottom of the screen or click on buy me a coffee. Thank you very much, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you.